Hello everyone, and welcome back to the series where I build a graphical text editor from the ground up, starting from just the terminal. So originally I had intended it just to create a couple simple modal bindings, Vim bindings, and call it a day. And instead I ended up having to do a bit of a refactor for the main file. So there isn't going to be a whole lot of theory here, it's mostly just code, so let's just go straight into the code. So right now I am in app.hpp, so this is the header file for the app class or application class. And let's go ahead and go through here. I moved most of the stuff that was in main into this class. So start off with, I've got this mode enum, so I've got various modes like normal, insert, replace, command, etc. It's pretty simple. Then we've got this application class with a destructor and the init and run functions here, and then a bunch of input processing. So I'll show you guys all this when we get to the source file. The rest of this stuff is pretty basic stuff. We start in normal mode, and I've got terminal settings stored here, and these are going to be the old terminal settings or original terminal settings that I will use to revert back to how the terminal was originally set up. Command string, this is for commands that are more than just a single character. And then the rest of the stuff is pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just go straight into the source file here. And yeah, so I found out that the resize buffer fixes that I had made apparently don't work, so I'm going to have to go ahead and work on those again. So we'll see where that goes. So in application, the destructor here, I'm just reverting to the normal buffer and setting the terminal attributes or terminal settings back to their original settings, turning off the logger, getting rid of everything else. Pretty simple stuff. I have the init function here that contains a bunch of stuff. So things like opening up the file, figuring out the size and loading it into the text buffer, getting settings set up along with the terminal settings and the text buffer settings, and then creating the actual text buffer and then loading stuff and moving into the alternative buffer here. There's a lot of buffers. It's a little confusing, I'll admit, but yeah. Anyway, run here is pretty simple. There's really nothing particularly fancy here, just going to process input here. And process input collects all the input, and this is actually the first place I wanted to mention something. If you've ever used C file IO, then you might notice on occasion things not happening at the exact time that you call the function. And that is because C file IO is buffered by default. So you don't necessarily call the actual functions that force all the input to go into its appropriate file or draw output from those files right away. Instead, it waits until you have a bunch of stuff and then it'll perform that command, which in some circumstances is fine, but in this case, I want stuff right away, and I want to wait for it. And so that's what I'm doing here. This read function is actually from the Linux file IO API. And so instead of using the standard one, I'm using this one. This is unbuffered. And so, yeah, it works pretty well. The alternative would be to use something like fread and then to flush the buffer, but in this case, I don't really feel like doing that. So I'm using this. And then I have a bunch of the various modes being handled here. And basically each mode has its own function that handles all of the input. And then if it can't handle it, let's say that for the sake of argument that one of these functions just doesn't know how to handle a particular input, then that will get sent to the global input function. And if that can't handle it, then it'll say, it was invalid input. So first look at the normal input here. I've got all the basics like the H, J, K, and L movement scheme. we've got A and I to move into the insert mode. And in this case, A also does an advance so that you can have something like this. So we'll move ahead one. Whereas I will go and start at the current cursor position. And this bit here is what is making the cursor change in shape. So this is specific to Xterm, so you might see different variations on this anti-escape sequence in order to, or it's not an anti-escape sequence, it's just generic escape sequence here, but it's, you'll see variations, but for Xterm, this is what you'd use. And then select mode, I haven't really implemented anything for select mode or for replace other than just this bit where it will change the cursor style. So again, if I press R, you'll see it has the kind of more typical replace cursor shape, little underscore. So I'll return to normal mode. And then command mode is entered by pressing colon. I'm sticking generally with kind of Vim style keybinds, but there are going to be probably some differences between Vim and what I'm doing here. So if we go to insert mode, right here I've got stuff for, I believe this is for delete. So this will detect if I hit the delete key and then do the delete thing. Otherwise it returns false. And basically anytime we have input anywhere that is not handled, then we want to make sure to return false there. This handles all the visual keys, so I can go ahead and insert stuff like that. Then also things like tabs and new lines. Could do all of that. And then backspace just removes one. It's the same basic idea. This is basically just how things were prior to implementing these bindings. Select input, again, this is basically empty, same with replace. Command is a little more complicated, so this is where I use that command string, and what I do is anytime I enter in a command character, in this case these are all non-control characters, it will add to the command string. If I press the backspace key, then it'll remove one. But once I press the enter key, it will actually process that command. And so that down here tells it if, in this case, if I use W, then it will try to save the file. If I press Q, it'll close in the editor. And anytime I use a command, it will automatically set the command string to 0 and return to normal mode. Then I have this process global input right here. And this is handling things like the escape key. So anytime, no matter what mode I'm in, if I'm in replace mode, pressing escape will return to normal mode. If I'm in select mode, it will return, doesn't really show anything because select mode doesn't do anything just yet, but it will return to normal mode. If I press an I and go into insert, then I can go back to normal mode. And all of those are handled by this single option here. Same goes for the arrow keys. All those arrow keys work, and in no matter which mode I'm using, which is, I think, pretty important. And this makes things a whole lot easier than having to enter in all of the circumstances where arrow keys are valid. Now, I will have to change it for command mode because in command mode you can't move up and you're not using the standard text buffer. So I would have to make something where I can move back and forth within the command buffer, and then also the up and down keys would probably go and search through the command history as opposed to going up and down in the buffer. So, but that's everything that is in the application source file. So go ahead and press :Q. And we'll go to the main file here. And as you can see, things have been stripped down immensely. So basically all this does is checks to see the number of arguments is greater than 1, and then it starts up the application, initializes, and then runs it. And that's basically everything there. So cleaned everything up quite a bit, which I like, and the framework that I have set up is pretty good, to the point where I can do most of the stuff that I really want to do as far as key bindings are concerned without having to make too many changes. I'm not worrying about leader keys or anything like that for this, just because I don't think it's truly necessary. And when that does eventually become a thing, I'll address it then. But for now, this is looking pretty good, and things are a lot cleaner now, so I'm pretty happy about that. And so now I have working modal bindings, or working Vim bindings. Now, there are going to be additions that are going to be made, but that's a future video. And in the next episode, I think I'm going to go back to the screen buffer. Now, it does work fairly well, but there are some things I'd like to fix. So one of the things is I cannot create any kind of mode line. And in this circumstance, I think that's kind of important. I would like to have a mode line that works. And I'd also like to be able to have things like line numbers, because that makes searching through files when I see an error a lot easier. I'd like to have the ability to potentially split the screen and have 2 buffers open at some point in the future. That'd be kind of nice. So I think that's where I'm going to go next with this. And just a bit of upkeep on the channel. I am probably going to stick with this kind of longer video schedule. There's a lot of topics that I'm addressing, and so they're pretty lengthy and complicated, and a lot of the time I spent with this is spent writing code. Some of it is admittedly spent playing Factorio because of the recent DLC, but that's neither here nor there. Essentially, the topics I'm addressing right now are getting more and more complicated, so I'm probably going to end up taking a bit longer to make these videos, but I think a week is enough for most of the stuff that I'm working on here. So, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this interesting or useful, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.